Okay, we are there.
Wait, yeah.
You can take that off now. I can take off. I can. No, I can't. I'm not wearing anything underneath. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. This is the December 2023 edition of Cloud State of Play. This is going to be a bit of a review of the year 2023. So we'll be just kind of going through some news items that we've covered and also highlight some new stuff that's come maybe our way that we've picked up on as well. It's become a bit of a tradition to do this for the December episode. And I think we did it last year as well. We were in suitably Christmas attire last year as well. So we've kind of carried on that tradition for this year as well. Yeah, so we're going to have to hopefully kind of go through a number of categories. Before we do that and talk to you about the categories, let me introduce you to a man who requires no introduction.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
So see, I didn't make an introduction, so that's good. We moved on to the next part of the discussion straight away.
I believe it's a year, more than a year we've been doing these things now.
Indeed. I think everybody should know you, but just for those who are tuning in for the first time ever, you have, first of all, a lot to catch up on. And then the other person I'm speaking to is called Paul Bevan. Paul is the Director of Infrastructure Research at Bloor Research. So welcome back again, Paul. Good to see you.
And you, yeah, very good. And I'm thinking, God, my name's out there now. I'm in trouble.
There's no going back now. You've got like a year and a half of humiliating episodes and whatever. People can look up. You're forever immortalized digitally. So there you go. Are you ready to go? Shall we talk about the categories?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, cool. So we did this last, and I think the categories were kind of sort of broad enough for us to be able to sort of cover a multitude of sins under each one and sneak in some stuff that we always wanted to mention, maybe forgot to mention or didn't have time to mention throughout the year. And also it allows us to kind of focus on certain areas. So the first of the categories, there's 5 of them. So the first of the categories is mergers and acquisitions. So what's been the latest kind of who's been buying who and things like that and how those things have gone. Number 2 has been kind of outages. So major outages, they could be some service, they could be cloud, they could be whatever. The third one is innovation. So what's been kind of favorite or most interesting innovation that we've seen for the year? Could be really kind of business related or tech related. The fourth one is cloud winners and losers. So specifically focusing on cloud winners and losers there. And then the fifth one is kind of a tech update. So kind of what's been maybe an interesting technology that's come along the way that we might have picked up on recently. So again, we'll go through that. Okay, so let's move on to the first of those, which is the M&A, mergers and acquisitions. So Paul, would you like to kind of go through the ones that you had in mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to revisit very quickly without sort of going into too much detail. So 3 key ones that are one that actually started last year and is really sort of finalized this year, which is the VMware Broadcom type. OpenText taking on MicroFocus and also the Cisco and Splunk one. So to me, the reason for sort of picking on those 3 is that they are at a very specific part of the mergers and acquisitions market, which is, where 2 very large organizations get together. And the question is, does that ever really work? And they always try and portray it as some sort of marriage of equals, and the reality is that's never the case. So I fear for VMware, and I, in the sense that the Broadcom culture is very, very different, and the VMware people are already starting to feel that. I think with the latest pronouncements from Broadcom that says you've got to get back to the office. And VMware people, I think, who've been used to being much more, home-based, been basically told if they live within so many miles, 50, I think it's 50 or 60 miles of the office, they're expected to be in a number of days a week. So I don't think they've gone completely bad, but it was interesting that, real clash of cultures. But the thing I wanted to bring up more than anything else is these are very complex things to put together. Culture is one, lots of different technologies, and I don't think they ever really work properly. I mean, if you look at OpenText and MicroFocus, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
If you go back 15 years, probably more, MicroFocus was a small, software company based in Berkshire, and it started to grow by acquisition, and it took this sort of large swathe of HP sort of systems management software and to try to turn, and they've really struggled over time to leverage that into something really coherent. I think that's the problem. It's making it coherent, and therefore, I fear for OpenText being able to take all the bits and pieces of Microsoft and do something with them. A lot of the time, of course, it is just seeing how much value they can extract rather than, growing the whole. So I just think those. So the Splunk one is interesting in the sense that there's an obvious synergy there between Cisco and Splunk, in the sense that in the sort of IT operations space and sort of networking space, data has become more and more important, and therefore there's logic to them getting Splunk. But again, you look, it's two quite large organizations, trying to marry cultures, and from a Splunk perspective, Splunk have been sort of outflanked and outfought, if you like, by some of the newer data companies coming along. So I think you forget that Splunk is a reasonably old, in sort of cloud terms, organization that predates the cloud. People think, oh, Splunk's really modern, but it's actually been around quite a while in modern technology terms, and therefore Cisco aren't necessarily getting something that is cloud native or particularly up to speed with some of the latest developments. Don't get me wrong, I think Splunk's good, but I don't think it's the be all and end all. So you look at these major mergers and think, actually, do you add value in these? And you'd have to look back over history and say, for the most part, one side or other gains something out of it. But is it, do you double the value of the whole? Do you, get that? And I don't. So there's been a number of those. Plus, of course, at the other end of the market, companies buy smaller companies to get over the sort of 2-year development gap that they get caught out. IBM classically have been sort of going on a spending spree for Apptio, NSI, Polar Security, and each of those is areas which they've been slow to react, and they've got 2 years of development to catch up, and therefore they buy something. Does that work? Sometimes, but actually to the detriment of the brands that they pick up. You fear for the small brands that an IBM picks up, because you lose a lot of the value of that. So I think it's interesting. I mean, we're seeing lots and lots of M&A activity, but it tends to be those two sort of polar opposites. Never mind the quality, feel the width type approach of the big boys, how much I put in there. And then this, oh my goodness me, I've dropped behind the race. How do I jumpstart something in a particular area? And I never think these are, particularly successful. It's interesting.
I mean, for me personally, the kind of the ones that you mentioned, my comments are the Broadcom acquisition of VMware that was only completed, by the way, in November of this year. We did cover it, so if anybody's interested in kind of knowing more about it, we covered it in the July and December episodes of Class State to Play from last year, actually. It's kind of strange bedfellows, I have to say, for that one. And the interesting thing that I found with that is, at least for me, and anybody who's seen more news about this, please let me know. Drop a link in the comments. But I've seen very little kind of discussion about kind of how it goes. Yes, I've seen a couple of articles that say, yeah, it's now kind of completed and is going to go maybe in this direction, or Broadcom's going to do that. I have seen, there was a report about job losses at VMware, about 2,500. Apparently, I don't know what division, where they're from, how accurate that is, but that was something that I did pick up on. And it was, it was just kind of that, that clash of, sort of markets, I think, the sort of where Broadcom is and where VMware are. And so that's going to be maybe something we'll look at again in a year's time and see how they've kind of fared over 2024 or something.
They're very different. And I got one interesting insight this year, I think, as we've gone through the year. It's not one insight, just as we go along, is that Cisco's, one of their previous acquisitions was Thousand Eyes. And it was interesting when that first happened. As an analyst, I immediately switched from, we had quite a good relationship with Thousand Eyes, but not a lot with Cisco.
Yeah.
So, we were talking to Cisco people, and it all changed. The atmosphere changed, the whole approach changed. They were starting to drop things into App Dynamics, which is part of their brief, and suddenly Thousand Eyes was being touted everywhere within Cisco, without anybody thinking what on earth it did for them. And the Thousand Eyes people move into the background. It was interesting. Give them about a year, and now we're back to where we were. We're now dealing directly with Thousand Eyes. They've absolutely made it clear that they're not an observability platform, which is where a lot of it was going. And so sometimes if the company doing the buying is sensible, they can actually get the most out of this. But quite often you see what happened in the early days between Cisco and Thousand Eyes being just carrying on, and so it destroys the culture of the smaller one you buy. But actually it can work. So to an extent, kudos to both the sort of Cisco management and the Thousand Eyes people for working their way through that one. I must admit, I feared for it when it first happened.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, again, that you mentioned observability, as we've, I think, noted in a previous episode of Classic Play, there was this jumping of the bandwagon that happened probably 18 months ago now, 2 years ago, something like that, where, you had people kind of in Splunk who were sort of doing that sort of search and things like that. They're very good at that kind of query stuff and, querying lots of machine data, as they called it. Because I went actually on one of their sort of half-day courses, and it was really fascinating, and kind of, did the practical of Splunk and everything, and that was really fascinating to do. And then you had people like, Turbonomic, App Dynamic, and then the whole sort of, Moogsoft and Datadog and Dynatrace and so on. So they were all kind of, somebody was doing sort of machine data, somebody was doing AI ops, somebody was doing APM, or application performance management. Somebody was doing, observability, just straightforward observability. And they all realized after a while, hey, these are just terms. We can just do all of them. And then they kind of all got, so you started seeing like Splunk about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, started to talk about observability. Hey, you can do your observability with us. I was like, well, no, hang on, you were like machine data. You were kind of more query and search. You weren't kind of real time and, things like that. Whereas, people like Dynatrace have always been, for example, in the observability space, but not necessarily in the APM space or the AI ops space. And then all of a sudden you saw them talking about AI ops and APM and, machine data and things like that. It's like, oh, okay, everybody's doing everything now? All right, I didn't know that. So
as an ex-marketeer,
yeah, the tricks.
I know the tricks, and as an analyst, you know the tricks that they get up to.
So there's a lot of that kind of, I think, backtracking, and I think with the Cisco acquiring sort of Splunk, the question for me is kind of what's going to happen to App Dynamics. Because like I said, they're all in this space. They're all kind of merged their capability, or at least they're claiming that's what they do. I don't know if anybody's kind of leading in that space, or kind of doing more in one than the other. I really don't know.
No, I mean, I think we could park this from a review perspective. I don't think Splunk and App Dynamics will merge into some sort of one single area. We'll come back to that, because I think it's to do with data rather than the application performance management. But what they're looking for is the data management capability you get with Splunk.
Okay, well, let's see that. But having said that, it does go back to what I was saying, and I did coin a term which, strangely enough, nobody's picked up on. Maybe it will still come back next year, who knows? Cloud network management. So that was something that we talked about. There was a company called Aviatrix, I think, which was doing a really good job, I think, in that. I saw a demo from them in AWS Summit in Berlin or something like that a couple of years ago. And they were doing a really good job. I think we mentioned cloud network management as a kind of, a converged sort of space where, you are actually doing cloud networking management type of stuff. And you should have been doing this a long time ago. So maybe kind of Cisco is, aiming towards that as well, with the Splunk acquisition. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's closing the visibility gap when you get to the cloud, for enabling people to pull together that end-to-end visibility. I'm not going to use the term observability there, but the ability to see end to end. And obviously it's moving towards, how do I ensure and assure end user experience, which is all spelled.
Yeah. Now on the OpenText acquisition of the British success that was MicroFocus, regardless of what you might think of MicroFocus, I think what they did they did it very well. It was perceived, I think, as kind of the unofficial sort of title or tagline was, where software goes to retire, was, I think, the title of kind of what they, how they did things. And that's what they were kind of really good at doing. And as you said, they acquired companies. I was working for SUSE at the time, so they acquired the whole sort of Novell, SUSE kind of thing. So we were part of MicroFocus at the time. So we saw this whole sort of, period of when they bit off, I think, more than they could chew with the HPE software division, software group acquisition. And I think what happened there was, this was one of those so-called spin merge, I think, type of acquisitions. So it was a $8.8 billion, equivalent to about 6.6 billion pounds, spin merge acquisition. It was more like a reverse takeover, really. Or at least that's what it sounded to me. Sounded like to me. MicroFocus paid HPE $2.2 billion. I don't know how kind of they managed to, total that to $8.8 billion, but that seemed to be the kind of the figure that was put out in the press. And yeah, it felt like a reverse acquisition, really, from my perspective. And the problem I think that MicroFocus had was that they, it started, I think it was announced in 2016, completed in 2017, and it had failed by 2020. Clearly, they were struggling to digest that acquisition of the HPE software division. And I think the reports said there wasn't a great deal of information out in the public, but they said that MicroFocus was struggling with the in-house systems that the HPE software division had in terms of integrating them and making them work as a kind of one unit, basically. So basically merging them with their own systems internally. So it wasn't necessarily oh, nobody's going to buy this anymore because now, or we're not going to buy anymore from this HPE division because now they're part of MicroFocus. It wasn't kind of a customer or public perception problem, but it seemed to be like an in-house, technology issue that they struggled with.
The HP software website, going back just prior to the merger, absolute nightmare for partners, nightmare for customers to find anything on. and it was too many individual product silos, nothing, really pulled together.
Yeah.
And it had just grown topsy, and trying to navigate your way through that to give yourself a chance of understanding what you could buy from HP's the software division was really difficult. I worked with a small, software sort of operations management type environment that spent a lot of its time doing HP work.
Yeah.
They used to despair of the sort of the right information, from a just marketing perspective.
And let's not forget the autonomy thing that HPE had just prior to that, a few years before that as well. So there's a whole legal stuff going on with autonomy's leadership allegedly cooking the books for autonomy and kind of hyping it, making it more than it was actually worth, and so on. And I think that was part of the acquisition as well. So it's like get rid of that toxic bucket as quickly as you can, as far as HP was concerned.
We're clearing the decks for their sort of move into sort of private and hybrid cloud type.
Yeah.
And yes, where software goes to die is probably slightly unfair in one sense, but probably true. And therefore, you're managing decline.
That was the internal.
Managing decline is always a problem.
So
I still fear for the OpenText MicroFocus piece, because I just think OpenText has maybe bitten off more than it can chew.
Yeah. Okay. So next one along, because we've got a couple more to mention here. The Microsoft and Activision / Blizzard acquisition. Ooh, I saw that. I saw that reaction. So this was a $68.7 billion acquisition from Microsoft, which equates to around 54.8 billion pounds. It was completed in October of this year. We mentioned it in the December edition, I think, of last year, Class State of Play, but also we went through it a bit more in the May edition of this year, 2023 Class State of Play episode as well. I think this is probably the most protracted and arduous kind of thing that I've recently come across. I'm sure there's been a lot in the past, but this is probably the most kind of painful one that I've seen. All of the merger and acquisition government bodies, so the Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA in the UK, I had to look this up, the Directorate General for Competition, or the DG Comp of the EU, and the FTC, I believe, is the Federal Trade Commission in the US, all rejected it at the beginning. But they were not the most vocal. The most vocal was Sony Computer Entertainment, SEC. SCE, Sony Computer Entertainment. So Sony would obviously make the PlayStation video game console, were probably the most vocal, and they were kind of making the most protestation. Interestingly, the likes of Ubisoft, which is also quite a large, or Electronic Arts, for example, also very huge players in the game space, and they kind of do lots of title releases and development and so on. I didn't hear really a great deal from them, certainly not on this sort of the gamer line and sort of gamer web, if you like. There wasn't really a lot of kind of discussions around from them. But Sony, I think, was the most vocal, and I agree, quite rightly so, to a degree, in terms of the probably the most leading title, the most important game of Activision and Blizzard makers, the Call of Duty series. That's a huge franchise, been around for a long time. I think the Modern Warfare was the last one that was released in November of this year. And I think the lifetime, I dug up some information. Thank you, ChatGPT, for the help. I did dig up some information on this. The lifetime sales for Call of Duty have been around 425 million copies of Call of Duty games so far. So that's, I think, up to the previous release, not Modern Warfare 3, but the previous release of Call of Duty. So that was quite a big an acquisition. I think pretty much everybody disagreed, and I think even Microsoft was being sued by gamers in the States when they announced the acquisition. I don't know if that lawsuits are still going on, but everybody was really against this acquisition. So Microsoft has to. There was a lot of pushback at the beginning. They hit back on this sort of the UK and said, well, we're just going to, I remember you and I think discussed this, and they said, well, we're just going to pull out all our assets from the UK, which was kind of absolutely ridiculous. I think that actually brought on even, worse criticism, against them in terms of what they were doing. The FTC then sued as well. I don't know if that's still going on. It might still be going, but they and some US gamers actually sued them. And then eventually Microsoft, made some compromises. So the 10-year deal with Nintendo, the online gaming, so the cloud games, game streaming games part of the business went to Ubisoft. That's a 15-year deal. Apparently, I didn't know actually how long it was, but I dug up some information on that. And they also, because Activision also owns people like King, who make the mobile games like Candy Crush Saga and stuff like that, on Android and what have you. Those are huge games, mobile games. I think there was a restriction from the CMA, certainly, and I think also the FTC, that they can't really invest in each other's IPs either. So Microsoft can't just give like $1 billion to the King team and say, hey, just produce the best, Candy Crush Saga next version of that game that you can, or something. So this kind of pocketed, sort of acquisition, if you like. And obviously the gaming part of the streaming games part of the business, the cloud streaming part of the games business went to Ubisoft as well.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. It sort of brought out into the into the daylight, if you like, the amount of lobbying and sort of background work that goes on with governments, and that's some of it slightly concerning. And how powerful are some of the big hyperscalers, the big software companies becoming, and how much influence do they have over government policy? I'm sure when we get around to talking about AI, it'll sort of some of the things that have happened in the last few weeks around AI will be interesting. But for me, it brought out that sort of continual battle between tech companies that don't want to be restricted in how they operate, and actually governments trying to do, I say do the right thing. That sounds very very noble, but fundamentally ensuring that you don't have such a level of monopoly power that it becomes a challenge and a problem. And this, seeing it more and more.
Yeah, and there's like this clash as well of ideologies. The business is kind of saying, well, what's the problem with me buying somebody else? What's the problem? They don't see the problem, or they see the problem, they kind of just ignore it. And then on the other side, you've got the government bodies who don't really know the business. They're not really kind of clued up about games and stuff like that. They just kind of look at it as a business acquisition, but they don't kind of maybe understand the intricacies within that particular market. It doesn't have to be games, really anything that happens. So that's, I think, there's like a clash, I think, of ideologies excuse me, there. And I think the other issue, which not even Sony has mentioned, and I kind of thought about this myself, is so next time Sony, let's say Sony releases the PlayStation 6. Now, when you release a new console, what you want is as many so-called launch titles as you can that come out on the same day, the first day of release of the console. You have some games to play. That makes sense, right? Okay, but what maybe people don't understand or kind of don't necessarily appreciate is the fact that the likes of Sony provide software developers like Activision, like Electronic Arts, whoever kind of they're partnering with, as well as their sort of obviously in-house development teams, kind of pre-production or beta models or even alpha models, so like emulators of the next generation of the video game console that they're going to release, right? So they give these months in advance, right, to these software or games developers, so they can start experimenting, getting the graphics right and understanding how the architecture works and things like that. Now, you can imagine with the PlayStation 6 coming out, how is Sony going to give that early pre-production console to Activision and avoid the Microsoft Xbox guy walking past that Activision developing going, oh, is that the PlayStation 6 beta model? Yeah. And then, so that I can see that sort of situation, and maybe Sony has thought about this. Sony, if you're wondering about that, maybe you can hire me and I can figure out things like that for you. But anyway, so point being is, that's what I thought of immediately. That wasn't necessarily kind of mentioned anywhere, but that sort of thing happens. And I'm kind of, being a slight gamer, I've been sort of in the background of this and kind of seen all of this sort of stuff happen. I've even seen some of the pre-production models and things like that people have, these console makers have actually, produced in the past. So I think that was kind of the thing for me. Never mind the billions of dollars and the concessions Microsoft's had to make and the being sued and stuff like that. They can handle all of that. But for me, it would be things like that, because those software houses, those distribution house software houses, have to sign NDAs, with Microsoft. They have to sign NDAs with Sony. They have to sign NDAs with Nintendo, and obviously they used to do with Sega when Sega made consoles as well. And so they could then have these consoles for months in advance, start developing their games, and hopefully the games will be ready on launch day. So there'll be a launch title, so to speak, so that the maker of that games console is not relying solely on in-house developed games on day one. They actually have some third-party support as well. But in order to do that, you have to give that console, probably a year, 18 months in advance. And it will be in the form of like a software emulation in a very kind of, wires sticking out kind of alpha, and then it becomes a beta, and it's somewhere between a board sitting in a very powerful PC, and then eventually you get like a console, right? And that's how the development normally goes. But anyway, so that was just something interesting that I picked up on. So.
Some of your passions coming out there, I think.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's it's an interesting thing, and you and I have been following the whole saga for the year. So it was just interesting to see about that.
And one of the words that keeps cropping up in these, people want lock-in, and actually, if you make it difficult for people to go anywhere other than, let's say, the Xbox, because of what's happening. So I think a lot of the mergers and acquisitions, authorities were looking at that and going, hold on a minute, there's going to be awful lock-in, so I think not good. But then you come back to this: is the hardware, is the actual controller, is the PlayStation or the Xbox really just a piece of commodity hardware, which is
true. True, there is that. I do concede that, and I recognize that.
Consumer markets are slightly different than the business markets when you come to that sort of perception of what is a piece of commodity hardware, because there is a lot of support, if you like, amongst consumers for particular platforms.
Yeah. Okay. So the two that I wanted to surprise you with, one you've I think beaten me to it, which was the IBM acquisition of Apptio. So that was a $4.6 billion acquisition. That's in the cost management and FinOps space, is my understanding. So say no more about that. But I did ask ChatGPT for these, and ChatGPT was very great at actually highlighting them. The other one, which was interesting that it highlighted for me, was a company called, or an investor called, San Francisco, let me get this right before I get sued. Francisco Partners acquired Sumo Logic for $1.7 billion cash. So that was a very quick acquisition. It was announced in Feb and completed in May of this year. And apparently they've taken them private. So they're off they removed the stock from NASDAQ. I have no idea what's going on there. That's all I know. But I just thought I'll mention that one.
And we might want to sort of, just look forward into 2024.
Not too much, because we have our projections. Don't forget.
That's what I mean. And we'll come back to that because I think there's a data story going on there.
Ah, okay. Right. Cool. All right. I think we've spent enough time on M&A. So let's move on. Outages was the next one. Now, we mentioned in the July episode, I think, about British Airways, we kind of questioned whether British Airways is an airline that's held back by its IT systems. The mobile app, apparently, for British Airways, I think I probably suffered from that, went down in May of this year. There was the whole Waypoint crash that happened on the 25th of May. There was a lot of short-haul flights that were cancelled in regards to that as well. And the Waypoint issue, I think, although sometimes, people explain what the problem is or what happened, but it's still not really an explanation of why it happened. It's kind of how it happened, or the way it happened, or something like that. So maybe the circumstance leading up to it. Because I know somebody in that sort of airline space, and I did ask him, a good friend of mine. I said, "Do you know about the Waypoint thing?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "So what's the industry saying about it?" And he said, "Well, it's just what you read in the press." He didn't know any more about it either. But the problem, I think, seemed to be that two waypoints of the same name were input into the system, and that confused the system. Now, I would have thought that your error handling would be a little bit better than crashing the whole thing, or sort of just stopping working and needing, kind of just losing the plot completely. But what do I know about airline software?
They said at the time that it was, quote unquote, vanishingly rare for this sort of thing to happen. And it brings me back to an awful lot of the outages you see. And when you get down beneath it, there's a real inability of probably most people, I'm not going to, point fingers, to do proper risk management on these things.
Right.
And you say, yeah, it may be vanishingly rare, but if it happens, it brings the whole system to a halt. You'd better do something about it. Whereas, they spend far more time fixing the easy things that happen over and over again.
Yeah.
Then they can go, "Oh, I fixed that. And so there's an awful sort of sense that people look at those vanishingly rare occurrences and say, I can ignore it. And it's never going to happen. And you think, yeah, but what are the implications if it does? And that was absolute classic.
Yeah, and for me, it's also, yes, you are catering for and dealing with the ones that you kind of maybe expect to happen or are relatively obvious to happen. And you can say, well, we haven't had a crash for the last 10 years. But that one singular one that you didn't accommodate, or for some reason, it just seemed to be impossible to think about, might actually set you back those 10 years in terms of, okay, so you haven't lost any money, you haven't cheesed off any of your customers for the last 10 years, but that just one clash could cost you the 10 years of downtime that you may have had, with other types of events and incidents, as well as, the goodwill of your customers. I mean,
sometimes those vanishingly rare occurrences require huge amounts of backup capability that people just won't spend the money on because it's so vanishingly rare that it actually happens. But in the Waypoint case, you looked at it and think, well, actually, if your testing was better, and if you used more regular synthetic data testing rather than relying on the real world, or it's not happening, just do that. And maybe AI will come back, AI will raise its head again that says, actually, you may be able to automate this process, because it comes back to human error.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now, the hyperscalers, all three of them, we're not going to leave anybody out, all had downtimes, lots of outages for this year. So everybody, I think, seemed to be struggling, I think, shall we say, with that. Now, interesting report I picked up from a company called, I've never heard of them, but a company called Parametrics Solutions, with an X at the end. Parametrics Solutions. They estimated in their report that downtime costs users $100,000 per hour. So that's obviously an average, but that's quite a substantial downtime. And some of these howlers have gone for days, certainly hours, but some of them have actually gone on for days. And a typical outage, again, I think this was from the Parametric Solutions report, an outage for AWS, a typical outage, could cost in total $3.4 billion as well, in terms of revenue lost. And not to leave out kind of those singular vendors. So I think Salesforce had an outage as well as Slack. Slack had it in July, October, November, and the recent one was in December as well. So maybe they'll get an award for most downtime or something. I don't know.
I mean, if you look, I mean, I know you've looked at the Thousand Eyes outage reports.
Yeah.
And I've sort of spent some time sort of digging into those. And for me, the thing that sort of comes out is that actually the network and the internet and the cloud networks themselves are now so prevalent, and you can work your way around problems and automated sort of rerouting of things. The networks aren't causing them. Where you're seeing most of the outages is in the back end systems. And again, what's happening is that normally, I say normally, quite a large percentage of them are happening after there has been a software update or a software change, a configuration change, and so again, it's you look at the cloud and sort of internet systems that are out, web-based systems are out there, they're very reliable, but they're not necessarily very resilient to being messed around with. And it's that messing around when you update that's causing the problems in the back end, that actually the networks themselves, despite us all getting slightly hot under the collar about, Russian submarines blowing up network, cables across, and those sort of things. The number of alternate routes are available means that network outages tend not to have major impacts because there's so many route runs now. What's having the impact is the back end systems. So, and again, you come back to, will AI help with that? In terms of better code quality, we can have all those sort of debates. Will automation help because everybody's trying to go too far, too fast? And automation will improve that. But that's where the problems are coming. They're coming in back end systems.
And I would say maybe a step back further from that is the architecture of the software as well. Are you really using kind of modern techniques for when you push out updates to your software? I doubt it very much, because that can certainly in a cloud environment, with A/B testing, blue green, and all that kind of other canary and what have you, all those kind of other ways of releasing software, you can certainly overcome those sorts of issues, but it just depends on whether your architecture, your software is architected in that sort of cloud native way. So the other one that was also a outage was Cloudflare. Cloudflare and Workday apparently had very similar at the same time kind of outage in early November. Seemed to be power related. I don't know what it was, but again, that caught my eye.
One of the things you have to look at with that particular one, and it's a learning curve for enterprises, I think, is to understand the relationships between the various cloud service and internet service and network service providers. Who uses what, what other service, the peering that goes on, the moving across networks, using particular elements of another vendor's or another service provider's architecture or services, means that you can think, well, Cloudflare's gone down, why is that affecting Workday? Until you look at it, see how much Workday uses Cloudflare infrastructure. So again, there's this whole issue that I've been addressing with some end users around, it's software as a service, is up to them to meet their SLAs. And you go, yeah, but if you want network assurance and if you want assurance that it's the whole thing's going to work, you need to take part in this as well. Yeah.
And there was, I think somebody CRN did like a top 15 outage as well. Try and include the link for the for that report in the description. I think Thousand Eyes also have their own sort of report as well. I think they talked about the Workday peculiarity about the Workday and Cloudflare outage as well. So we'll go to that.
Yeah,
okay.
That blog is good because it does all the monthly updates on that.
Right. Okay.
Worthwhile putting up.
Cool. All right. So let's move on to the third of our categories, which was innovations. So I think without having to really kind of dilly-dally with that, it's the AI in general, artificial intelligence in general, and Gen AI, generative AI, probably the most innovative thing that we've seen this year, and certainly the kind of the follow-up explosion of those types of platforms, for 2023.
It sort of tended to sort of put everything else into the shade, didn't it? And therefore, I think you asked the question, is it going to explode from there, or is it going to implode? And I think as ever, it will
more projections for next year.
It'll be somewhere between the two, but we'll come back to that. But I mean, it's clearly been something that's shaken people. I think that's probably the way I put it. Everybody's been shaken to the point where everybody's trying to react very, very quickly, sometimes with devastatingly bad effects. You worry about the Amazon queue or Bard's problems of trying to keep up with OpenAI. And I think people just rushing to get on the bandwagon without really what's going on. And Gen AI becoming the sort of conflated with general machine learning and AI in itself. And I think when you look, what's going on, AI and machine learning are developing at the normal sort of pace. Gen AI has come in from sort of left field almost. But actually, is there much activity going on in production of Gen AI? There's a lot of production activity for AI and ML generally, but Gen AI has some way to go. So I think it's one of those ones that burst onto the scene, very, very innovative. I mean, it's clever, and we've all played with it. I mean, it's interesting to watch and see how it does it, and the ability of it to merge the deep fakes. I don't know whether you saw the Putin one.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Fascinating. It caught him out. It was lovely. It was caught him out, and he had to stop and think. But it just shows what can be done with this technology. But I think it's it's in that how the hell are we going to use it type phase.
Was that by the FSB or something?
No, I think it was genuinely somebody who wanted to give Putin a hard time. And just caught him out. How the hell they snuck that in? I mean, you could say, it must have been the FSB, because how the hell could they insert that into the stream without somebody picking up on it in an environment like Russia today? But I almost hope it was some sort of dissident sitting in his in his flat somewhere, going, I'm gonna show him what it's like. So
yeah. I've seen plenty of ones on TikTok, so there's quite a lot of other ones on TikTok as well. So there's a ton of them. So I mean, I think we may cover more of this around this sort of the whole AI sort of space and the Gen AI space in a special episode that we're considering of doing. So something that you guys might want to have a watch as well in the future on the channel. So we're looking at having a AI state of play. So that might be like a quarterly thing that we'll do, depending on our time, really. We'll maybe just do one episode and see how we get on with that, and just cover what's happened in the last sort of 18 months or so, and then take it from there.
But if we know what we're talking about, we could.
If we know what we're talking about, but the
deep fakes up and just let it run.
Exactly. Yeah, it won't be us. It'll be just kind of a couple of deep fake Richards and Pauls maybe doing it for us. Just some scripted, some ChatGPT script or something generated for us.
More interesting and more engaging than the.
You never know. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know. Yes, it won't be famous. It'll be infamous then at that point. I think. But certainly, I think things like multimodal large language models or LLMs have played a big part in kind of bigging up that sort of and upping that sort of hype as well. There was that sort of early, I think we're all gonna die and AI is gonna kill us and stuff like that, sensationalism, I think, in the press. That was early on this year. But then, it kind of then settled down to a kind of a tech. And now I'm kind of almost just seeing the cusp of, but how are enterprises going to use it?
Yeah.
And we won't go into that because that will be a spoiler, I think, for the AI state of play episode that we want to do. But we can cover that a lot more, I think, in that. But there seems to be like almost a consensus of kind of how that will be. But certainly, multimodal large language models, LLMs, kind of coming in that can deal with multiple modalities. So things like text and graphics and sound, and some specifying or focusing on music and things like that. All of that, I think, is going to be sort of probably multiplied by next year. You're going to have a lot more of those types of models coming out for next year.
I think an area where, if you like, the consumer approach, you're talking about music, you're talking about pictures and videos and those sort of things, will start to inform enterprises how they might use this.
Yeah.
I think enterprises are struggling with thinking, what's the use case at the moment? I think this will be a classic consumerization one that says, actually, they'll start to see how it plays into their businesses because of what happens out in the consumer space. Yeah,
and we did also cover this, as anybody's interested in having a watch of kind of further space. We did cover it in a previous class state of play episode as well. Can't speak anymore. I've been talking for an hour, and we did talk about kind of AI and resources for AI and power and things like that as well. That being an issue, you and I think we did discuss that a while back. So again, I'll put a link in the description for that particular episode of Class State of Play. But yeah, AI State of Play, that's kind of what we're maybe going to do as a sort of an experimental quarterly sort of episodic series of episodes that we can do, and we'll see how that goes. And yeah, and we don't know. We're kind of probably kind of speculate on the future of that, and we'll certainly do that in the January projections episode as well. But certainly, kind of that whole AI space, I think, has been definitely the innovation for this year.
Yeah.
Okay. Now on to the fourth one, which is the cloud winners and losers. So you wanted to mention NVIDIA as a winner in this space.
Yeah. So, again, we've talked about NVIDIA, and we've talked about the challenge to Intel and AMD and others through what's happening. But if you're looking at the winners of the year, partly because of cloud, partly because of AI, it's both. NVIDIA has come from not nowhere, but it again, if you'd gone back to the early days of NVIDIA and said to people, graphics cards are going to actually take over the world, you would have been going, really? Why? And again, it's one of these ones that's they were in the right place at the right time. I think an awful lot of luck in terms of having the product that suddenly met a need. But my goodness me, it's really gone gangbusters, I think is the term for them.
Yeah.
And making things possible that probably people didn't think was possible. So I just thought that they're probably the biggest winners out of what's happened this year.
And I think we covered them in the October episode, I think, of Class State of Play. Now the other one we wanted to touch on was kind of telcos slightly.
Yeah, and it was the other end of the spectrum. I think this has been a sort of slow burn, but you sort of feel that the telcos as a group have really not managed to take advantage of the cloud world as much as they should do. The fact that you're getting the likes of Amazon coming in with technology stacks in for the space, it ought to be a warning sign for them that all is not right. And they've got challenges because they've got this huge estate of, you know, physical infrastructure they have to deal with, you know. But you can look at, they've gone down the OpenStack route early, you know, and that's made life probably more difficult than it should be for them, you know. And again, I always come back to the fact that you know, there are cultural and marketing issues at play here that make it difficult for those companies to get to grips with the way in which the hyperscalers, but the cloud companies in particular, go about doing their business. It's just, you know, you can almost look at telcos as being public sector as opposed to private sector, you know, in the way in which they operate. So I think they're in danger of, you know, they've sort of known instinctively that there's a real existential threat to them because they're going to be just pushed to the bottom of the technology stack under, you know, low margin business, and yet they seem incapable of getting out of it. You know, and you go through, you know, people like CenturyLink, you know, becoming Lumen and still being in trouble, and you know, the AT&T and Verizon seeing pretty, you know, flat revenues and flat profits and really struggling. And they've got, you know, real challenges. So let's not underestimate the challenges they face in moving from where they were, you know, from what was really a hardware environment to a software-defined environment. It's been a challenge for them, but I think they've you know, they've struggled to make the two things come together.
Yeah, and I think on the telco side, what I think I picked up on, a word that I picked up on, was digitization of the telco services. So we saw over the probably last 5 years, maybe more, you know, things like network function virtualization appearing, which kind of digitized all that very proprietary stuff that you used to do, you know, in telco equipment, all being virtualized basically. So you can run it in software as a normal service, and you could run that in, you know, a virtual machine. You can run that in a container. At least more recently, it's kind of, you know, gone into the container space, which you know, begs the question about sort of using OpenStack. And OpenStack, I think, was a false start. We covered OpenStack in the June episode, I believe, this year, and kind of I think we both exchanged what we felt about OpenStack in that one, so we won't go into that. But the one I wanted to pick up on just very quickly was open source, and that sort of got hit quite hard this year with some license and subscription changes, or license mainly changes, you know, by some vendors in the open source space. So Red Hat kind of, you know, changed their enterprise Linux licensing, which has had an impact, or you know, seemingly will have an impact on downstream projects. So that was unfortunate. And also HashiCorp changed their license for Terraform. And I don't know if this is actually pervasive across all of their solutions, but certainly Terraform. And I've also started hearing about Vault as well, which is their secrets management solution, changing their license as well. That's just had an almost immediate impact and response from the open source community. So you've had forks, that's FORKS, of lots of the you know, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux equivalents, and Terraform has also had some forks as well. So OpenTofu has been one, and OpenTF being the other forks as well, from the Terraform open source project. So, and I think actually there was a Open Bow or something. I can't remember the name. I will try and put the link in the description, which is a fork of Vault as well, Terraform, or rather HashiCorp's Vault as well. That was very recent, actually. I just picked up on that last few days. So I think this has caused a lot of turmoil. Certainly the forks are not going to help. Enterprises now, most importantly, I think enterprises are now kind of started asking the same question that they thought they had answered in the last 10, 15 years, which was, can we rely on open source software? And, you know, and can we use it and embed it in our, you know, business systems? And I think that's really unfortunate that sort of thing is having to, you know, to come back again.
Yeah, it's a natural cycle, I think, in the industry.
Is it?
I think so. I think, this idea that you come up with a new, if you go back to the early Unix days, everybody, then suddenly everybody jumped on different flavors of Unix and made it their own, because there's a desire, I think, from an enterprise level to have something that is, supported and stable. And open source has always been seen as, yeah, it's great, it doesn't cost us anything, but how do we support it? And therefore you see supported versions, and therefore you see, the Red Hats of this world growing, and then obviously IBM takes over and, maybe imposes some of its corporate culture on the environment. But fundamentally, you get back into this, as an enterprise, you want something that you can turn to somebody and say, it's your fault, you fix it. I mean, that's a very negative side. But fundamentally, they're looking for that assurance that it will run. And there's always been within an enterprise world a slight nervousness about open source. They can see the rapid development and new opportunities, but then, of course, of running it on an ongoing basis and getting the people who can support it and maintain that support is actually quite difficult, and that's getting worse rather than better. So
yeah, I mean, I recognize that. I think the point I was trying to make was around, I think it's, at least the way I see it, there's a potential sort of subtle difference there, is that where you can take something and innovate on it, that is the nature of open source. That is what you do. People don't like something that, it could be as simple as the GUI that you're using for something. I don't like that button being there. I'm going to go and do my own version, which moves the button from left to the right side of the GUI or something. It can be, they can be kind of quite pedantic about things like that. But this is kind of a commercial, seems to be like a commercial decision that these very large organizations, which have pledged to be in the open source world, they've, built up huge communities, and then thus those communities have gone on to work in enterprises and brought in that technology into the enterprise, into the business. And now you've just kind of seemingly pulled the carpet from under them all. And I think that is not the same as saying, well, I want to improve on Terraform, so I'm going to do my own version of Terraform. These are reactionary moves against stuff which seems to be going in the opposite direction of the openness that you get in open source, and that sort of the spirit of having open source software. And I think these people have kind of gone through these new licenses that the likes of Red Hat and HashiCorp have put out, and clearly they disagree with the wording and what the implications for these licenses is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I just think it's a natural evolutionary life cycle going through, and what you're getting now, either the forks or be people breaking away and doing something else, will lead to a new set of capabilities that then become the new Red Hat, if you like, or the new, Terraform, or the new, whatever. Something that we can't even see at the moment will come out of an open source community that provides all sorts of opportunities for enterprises to say, oh yeah, we're going to use that one now, until you get to that point where, you get a level of maturity coming in and people saying, well, I need it supported, and I'm not so bothered in having, huge numbers of new features all the time, but I just need stability. You come back into that and it will splinter off, and you'll get another, it'll go around that cycle. I do genuinely believe this. The commercial imperative to make money, I'm afraid, will keep on doing this to this type of model over and over again, and then people will say, right, I'm going to declare UDI and I'm going up into the hills, away from the government, and actually go and develop my own things again, and start off another round. So I think it's a natural evolution. We don't like it, but it's sort of, quite, if you want to get it to real adoption in enterprises, you almost have to go down that route.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'll I'll agree to disagree, I think, on that one,
Yeah,
because I don't see it as a very natural sort of approach. But maybe we'll pick up on this, because I think there will be repercussions next year.
World. It shouldn't be, but we haven't got an ideal world.
Yeah. Okay, right. So let's move on to the last of our categories, which is the tech updates. Now, for me, it was really maybe a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Certainly on the Microsoft side, with Microsoft's announcements at the Ignite conference, and also I think OpenAI did their Dev Day or some Dev Days or something like that event a couple of weeks before that as well. So the innovations for me that I saw, the tech updates that I saw there, were building on what they had released with ChatGPT prior to that. So things like GPT-4 Turbo, GPT-5, I think is going to be coming out next year, and also GPTs, the kind of the agents approach of how you can build your own or train your own model built on top of a foundation model, and then even commercialize that, have like an app store as well. I thought that was a good type of update. You could also maybe call it an innovation, but certainly a tech update building on top of the success of ChatGPT. That was one of those. What did you pick up on as kind of an interesting thing for you?
The interesting one for me, which was, having said that we haven't seen many use cases for large language models yet, was Big Panda, who are AI ops company, who have been working quietly in the background with, I think it's OpenAI based, but I have to go back and just double check on that one. But certainly in terms of large language models, working very closely with a number of customers in using those to look and see how a large language model can improve the predictability of what's happening and reduce mean time to failures, all those sort of awards. And they've been through a number of loops looking at it. Firstly, taking just raw data, the raw data that comes and feeding it in. And the reality of that was that it didn't do much better than many of the sort of platform, the sort of systems they currently use today. They were seeing the same sort of results. What happened was interesting, was the more enriched the data became, the more context they put into it, the ability to see in a much wider sense of data coming in from different sources rather than the individual silos, and they contextualized it, then run it through the large language models. The results were fairly impressive, to put it mildly, both in terms of the speed with which they got to the what was the core reason why this thing happened, but also starting to get into predictive mode. And so they've been working in sort of beta mode with that, with a number of customers now. And the results we're starting to see, and they're starting to share those results, are impressive. So I think, having said, there's a bit of hype around large language models at the moment, we haven't really seen it in the wild. Hats off to Big Panda for really going down that route. And without sort of prefacing anything that's going to come in 2024, Big Panda are now starting to talk about themselves as being a data company rather than an AI ops company. It's sort of intriguing.
Okay.
And again, I will come back to that in 2024 about 2024 being the year in which we really understand what data means and data quality means and all those sort of issues, because it's these large language models are forcing us to look at that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I think that will be. I want to keep an eye on that for next year. Let's see how that goes. Maybe there might be another search and replace for marketing teams to do, going from AI ops, observability, APM,
data,
and machine data just to data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Data searches. Okay. Right. Okay. So the other one I picked up on was the both AWS at reInvent. And by the way, if you want to have a summary of reInvent, I've done a specific video with John Hammond, who's from AWS. So do check that out. I'll with a link in the description of the video again. So AWS reInvent and Microsoft Ignite both announced, at both of those conferences, they announced AI accelerators. So AWS announced the Trainium 2, Graviton 4, which is, I think, their sort of conventional ARM-based processor, but Trainium2 being an AI accelerator. Excuse me. And I think Microsoft one is called Cobalt, is it, or something like that? Can't remember what the name is. Again, I'll try and include some details on that. So piggybacking on that was this new concept of having a hyperscale data center that's actually specific for AI. So actually purpose-built for AI. I'm really intrigued to see what do they mean by purpose-built, and what does that mean sort of going back all the way back to the cables and racks and the building itself and how you cool it and things like that. So that would be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I could wax quite lyrical on that one because I've been looking at it.
Let's save it for an episode for next year.
So I shall keep quiet for now. But I think, and that's a real opportunity for new players to come in and challenge the hyperscalers.
Yeah, and I think I mean you're into that space, so I'm expecting good stuff from you for next year on that subject. The other one I saw recently was has kind of picked up momentum is vector databases. So that's really good that that's actually being kind of perceived and recognized as another type of database specific for sort of AI workloads and inference and things like that, and creating tokens and so on. So that's really, I think, great. And then just not to be kind of negative on the likes of Red Hat and so on. I was at the Red Hat. Oh God, I'm going to forget the name of the event now. It was I can't remember the name. I forget it. I'm not even going to bother trying to remember the name. Red Hat had a tech event in London. I think earlier this month or late last month. I can't remember. And they demonstrated Ansible Lightspeed. So Lightspeed is a Gen AI-based code generation sort of version of Ansible. And it was great to see that the guy who was demonstrating it, he went into an Ansible script and then he typed kind of as a prompt or as a remark within the script, within the code, he typed what he wanted. And the Lightspeed part of Ansible generated the code for him. So he said, I want an instance in AWS that's, this t-shirt size, this much RAM, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he specified what he wanted, and it generated the Ansible code, script code for him automatically under that remark. And then he moved on to say something else about a Kubernetes cluster, and it generated the Kubernetes, the script for the Kubernetes. And then he actually executed that code, and it ran without any bugs or any stops, and generated that environment for him in AWS or Azure, or whatever it was, in that public cloud, which I thought was quite impressive. So that as a tech sort of innovation or update, I thought that was really good. I thought that would kind of save you tons on scripting stuff, and at least the menial stuff initially, anyway, to begin with, and hopefully it kind of learns from your style and what you want and the kind of things that you normally do, and maybe kind of offer more help in the future. But Ansible Lightspeed, I thought that was quite good. I think HashiCorp are doing something similar rather to that as well. I think this is in pre-production or in beta or something, beta tested at the moment. But that kind of thing, I think, will help you to build your cloud infrastructure a lot more easily and quickly. We've had a lot of, we've looked at, I think, in the past and discussed tools that are sort of, reverse engineer your cloud environment. So there is actually a company that will, if you've built a cloud environment, they'll go and sniff the cloud environment and actually reverse engineer a Terraform script for you based on what they can see in your cloud environment, for example. So there is those tools out there that can actually do that. But, creating it and making it your own and making it specific to what you want by simply having a description, having a kind of a sort of a declarative way is I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that'll be a big improvement, a big game changer over the course of the next couple of years. Really.
Yeah, and to see that demonstrated, so he literally wrote a couple of the remarks, it generated the code, and then he executed the script, and it went off and generated that environment, automatically for him. And that was really good. And I think it also, if I recall correctly, and people can correct me on this, but it also actually told you where it got the code from. So it actually said, I had to go to, GitHub to get this code. it's in this project, it's in this GitHub repository, blah, blah, blah. Or I had to go to, this other source somewhere else to get, and it actually told you what, so just kind of in case of copyright and infringement and things like that, it actually was kind of giving you the sources as well, which I thought was quite cool. Right. Anything else for you in terms of tech updates? Do you pick up on anything else?
No, the only other one which I came across very recently, and it's much more around edge computing, was a company called Nebulon, which was really a storage.
I've heard of them, but I don't know anything about them.
They basically, what they've got is they've offloaded all the. In fact, while they were a storage company, they offloaded the network first, and then the storage literally into a card that goes inside, and it's a very small card that goes inside local servers. If you think, we're going to have equipment out there, but it really starts to address the issues of how do you manage that. So it's got remote management capability, but it offloads to storage, so you can have storage. It literally makes managing the server environment or the hardware environment out at the edge much easier. And this is a physical device that slots into I'm going to say, I can't think what the technical term is, but basically slots into a small footprint server.
Right.
Really does two things: takes all the sort of network management and the storage management and offloads it from the processors, so you don't have to put more and more. So more of the processing power can go to things like using AI. It offloads that, but it also creates a secure, almost like panic room for the data.
Okay.
Really clever little device. This is a neat combination of software definition and a physical hardware device being married together to manage the problem of both networking, data, and security in an edge environment. And so, we'll maybe go a bit further. I need to dig a bit deeper, but everything I've seen so far says Nebulon could be something interesting in the edge world, if not
in the edge. Yeah, that sounds really interesting as a tech update. It'll be, maybe we can visit that next year and kind of see how that progresses.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I think we're there. We've been talking for some time, and I think we've kind of covered quite a lot of ground in this episode. So again, Paul, thank you very much for your time and all your insights. Appreciated as always. I think I'm always learning something new. You always mention stuff like a Nebulon or whatever, and I go, oh, that's a new one. I didn't know about that. So that's something we can go and investigate.
And likewise, and it's great because I know you're at the other end of the spectrum in terms of cloud native versus my old mainframe background past, and I think that coming together is so useful at times. It's been fascinating for me too. Keeps this old brain active, that's for sure.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to be of service. So always
thank you.
Always happy for that. Okay, so so thank you, Paul. Again, appreciate your time. As many of the links as I can will be in the description of the video. I will try and include as many of the topics that we've discussed. I would really appreciate it if you guys can support me by subscribing to the channel. It's really important. I'm kind of almost there to 500 subscribers, which is quite cool. And I like this sort of the small community a lot. I get sort of messages from people about the episodes and things like that, which is quite good. If you have any suggestions for next year, please drop them either in the comments section of the video or drop me an email. I think my email address is on the YouTube channel page, so please do that. May I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope 2024 is going to be a fantastic year for you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this long video. I really appreciate it. And you're still watching it, which is fantastic. Please feel free to check out some of the previous episodes of Class Data Play, as well as maybe checking out some of the other talks on the channel as well. Bye for now.